Well, hi. This is the 11th day of Christmas, so the beginning of this sermon will refer to the holiday season, so it's not entirely out of place. This is the work of Reverend Karen Anderson. I like her work a lot, and she begins her sermon with a reading that she wrote. It's a love letter she sent to a complete stranger in December of 2004. She'll give you the background in a moment. Here's the letter. Dear Tammy, I'm so sorry to hear of your recent horrific experience with fire and the aftermath of recovering from such extensive burns. I can't imagine how painful that is, so your will and determination to make it through this are remarkable. Your daughter has told us that you are a trooper. A trooper. I hope you heard the extra meaning in that. Someone who can make it through, thick and thin, who leads others forward when they feel downtrodden and in despair, even themselves at times. You are clearly a force of nature to start to make it to the other side of this, and a shining star for how difficult it is to keep on keeping on through adversity. It sounds like there is more surgery for your hand, so I'm hoping that keeps progressing and healing. During this holiday time of much happiness and sometimes forced joy, I hope you can take some time for yourself and realize that you are a wonder, a miracle, a gift to the universe, that you are the epitome of resilience and strength. So shine on, darling. Be gentle with yourself. Breathe and feel how connected you are to those of us who don't know you, but hold you in our hearts and minds with love and compassion. Thanks for being a light onto the world, Tammy. You are loved. XOXO, Karen. Okay, let me explain that reading a little better. The last holiday season, I did a spiritual practice of writing love letters to strangers, mainly because I was intrigued by a young woman named Hannah Buckner, who started an organization called The World Needs More Love Letters. It still exists. In December of 2024, she had the 12 days of letter writing. Anyone could participate in this endeavor. The recipients of these love letters were recommended by a family member or a friend because their family member or friend could use some extra love. And indeed, I was one of presumably hundreds, if not thousands of people who participated this worldwide. And then on Christmas Day, these people were delivered hundreds of love letters by complete strangers as their Christmas present of sorts. Can you imagine receiving that letter on Christmas Day? Now, I've continued this practice every month since that December. At first, I did it as a discipline of goodwill and working toward that dictum of Jesus' highest compliment, to love your neighbor as yourself. Every month, there are 2 or 3 new people with a little description of who they are, what they're facing currently, and what they're facing in the future. And by facing, I mean there were serious tragedies that had befallen these people. Fires, accidents, complicated surgeries, caring for a family member when they had a disability or illness. There were emotional challenges too. Depression, anxiety, mourning, loneliness, and isolation. And there were financial challenges, loss of a job, extreme drops in income, or a divorce that led to a rocky financial stability. All of the recipients were wrestling with some significant challenge. So each month, I look online to see who the new people are. I read about their trials and travails, and then I sit down and I write them a note. Sometimes I'd pound one out in 10 minutes. Sometimes it could take 45. But the writing never feels like a burden or an obligation. It feels strangely liberating and, well, connective. We need a better word in English more than connective, because with each letter, I felt like I was becoming a true neighbor, or even a faraway friend, because of how much love and compassion I now hold for them. As I've reflected on that, I've tried to figure out, why is that? What made it so easy to feel close to them and have compassion for them? I think it's because these weren't just strangers. They were strangers whose story I now knew, which means they weren't really strangers anymore. And as I kept thinking about this, it left me with a pickle. It left me asking myself, what do I do with the strangers who stay strange? Or to put it another way, if knowing someone's story is the key to having compassion for others, are we doomed when it comes to people whose stories we will never know? Well, at first I felt really stuck. Seemed like we were a bit doomed. But then I thought about church. Or more specifically, I thought about being a minister. Let me explain. If there's one thing that being a minister has taught me, it's that we all suffer. After over 20 years in the ministry, it hit me that nobody escapes what I call the big three, the triad of mental health issues, addiction, and abuse. For some people, it's all three. For others, it's just one. But somewhere in people's larger family system or circle of friends, there is always at least one of these big three that has played out in their life more often than not, is playing out right now or in the near past. And yet, when we think of strangers, the lady bagging our groceries, the man who checks our meter readings, our electrical readings, the older woman who sits outside the grocery store on a bench, the loan officer at the bank, we almost always forget that. At least I forget that. I forget that everybody is living with some sort of struggle, some story of struggle that deserves my empathy and compassion. Or to put it another way, ministry has taught me that I know people's stories without literally knowing their stories. All I have to do is to remind myself that my circle of family and friends is not unique. This is going to seem like a leap, but this, I think, is where Jesus comes in. See, for a long time, Jesus' call to love our neighbor as we love ourselves never made sense to me. It felt like an impossibility, like he was telling us to love in some kind of a superhuman way. But now I think Jesus' commandment was less about ramping up my ability to love and more about ramping down my assumptions about difference, about how different neighbors are. The Christian theologian Richard Beck gets at this. He writes the following regarding the commandment to love thy neighbor as thyself. He says, Jesus is trying to blur the boundary between self and other. Jesus is trying in this great commandment to form an identity relationship between self and other, to see our lives intertwined. The hallmark of this fusion is empathy, the ability to stand in another person's shoes and ask a simple question: if this were me, What would I want? Unquote. Now, this intertwined relationship we usually hold only for those we know intimately. We can stand in their shoes because we know their shoes. We can offer them our compassion because we know they deserve our compassion. They, in this sense, have earned it. So, compassion out of the blue for someone I don't know intimately? Well, how could I even begin to do that? I have no idea if they've earned it or if they deserve it. And yet, this is exactly the mindset that I think Jesus was trying to break us out of. He wasn't saying you should love your neighbor as yourself. He was saying you can love your neighbor as yourself. You don't have to wait until you figure out if they deserve your compassion because you already know they deserve it. And how do you know that? Well, because you know they suffer. And how do you know they suffer? Well, because everyone suffers. It's all about, as Richard Beck put it, allowing those boundaries to blur. Or as I said before, it's all about reminding yourself that you know their story without having to literally know their story. So that's complication number one that my love letter practice left me with and how I sorted it out. But there's another complication. The people who were nominated to receive the love letters had nominations that were written in compassionate terms, as in the stories were shared by someone who already loved them and so were presenting them in a loving light. But when we meet most strangers, that loving light just isn't there. It's more of a gray, dingy light often. That list of strangers I brought up, the lady bagging her groceries, the meter reader, the older woman on the bench of the grocery store, the loan officer at the bank, truth is, we often catch them on a bad or just normally exhausted day, which means they are likely to be mean, dismissive, rude, or indifferent. Far from being bathed in a heartwarming light, they aren't even bathed in a likable light. So once again, if that's the story I'm being presented with, how the heck am I supposed to stir up compassion for them? Well, again, Jesus came to my rescue because I remembered he didn't say like your neighbor, he said love your neighbor. And the difference between like and love is pretty vast. A colleague of mine gets this really well. He was talking to a larger group of us on the topic of love, and he said, like is when you know the best side of someone and like them because of that. Love is when you see the worst side of someone and not just love them despite of it, but love them because of it. Another way of saying this, like is about positive and attractive traits, but love is about holding one another in our wholeness. It's not just the pretty, fun, or convenient parts of the other person. It's all the messy bits as well. I'm reminded of what the Buddha said when he was asked, what's the difference between like and love? And he said, when you like a flower, you just pick it. When you love a flower, you water it daily. The one who understands this understands life. So what's he saying here? Well, you know, I think he's trying to get us to see that we can detach likability from compassion. Or to put it another way, I think he's trying to get us to see that we don't have to like someone to root for them and care for them. And let me add here, I know we're reading the news. That is really, really hard to do sometimes. Really, really hard to do. The challenge to distinguish between like and love has come into my life multiple times, but I don't think more so than when I was starting in the ministry. I was doing an internship of sorts with a colleague in New York City, And he asked me to go visit a parishioner who was particularly, let me say, salty. This person was never in a good mood. They were quick to judgment and criticism and often treated my mentor with disrespect and sass. My visit with them wasn't much better, but I remember sitting down with my colleague later and asking him, how do you show up for that guy when he's in the hospital and sick? What gets you there besides an obligation and duty? And he said to me, I see ministry as a commitment to my congregation to live into Jesus' dictum to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't always have to like my parishioners, and truth is, I don't like some of them very much at all, but I do have to love them. Not because I'm obligated or duty bound or paid to do it, but because there is a spiritual discipline in it of showing up with a genuine desire to support their growth and betterment, a genuine desire for their path to be easier, and a genuine desire to do what it takes to make it easier. That's how I think of love, which is greater than whether I like them or not. I see it as central to my calling and work. That right there was probably the best piece of advice I ever got in the ministry, and the one that I've tried to keep true to my own calling and heart. It helps me remember I don't have to like the folks in the congregation all the time, but I am called to love them all the time, which again means we don't even have to enjoy each other, but instead means we want the best for each other, whether people have earned it or not. Here is the thing, though, friends. I have found it tremendously challenging to take this outside the congregation's walls. Now, I have the blessing of knowing many of my parishioners' stories. So when they aren't having the best of days, because I know some of their story, I can give them slack. I can put their not so great behavior into a wider frame. So yes, the challenge, it seems to me, for all of us is how do we quite literally take this outside of our walls? How do we get there? How do we live into this bizarre and challenging call to love our neighbor even when we don't necessarily like them? Well, simply put, I think it takes practice. It's not something we can think ourselves into or that I can talk us into. So, with this need for practice on my mind, I found myself taken back to memory. Here it is. A couple of years ago, in the dead of winter, I met a parishioner at the church I was serving in Rochester, New York, upstate New York. We were going to a meeting at our partner church about 30 miles away, and we were going to leave her car at a bus lot near where I lived, so we could travel together to the meeting, and then I could drive her back, and we could go each our own way home from the bus lot after the meeting. So I got into my car in Rochester, she got into hers, and she followed me down to the bus lot. Now, it was snowing heavily. The roads were getting sketchy. The sky was filled with those big flakes that slap onto the windshield and take forever to melt. Trust her on this. The snow made visibility difficult, and the cars around us on the way down were slipping and sliding, so we were taking it slow, inching our way to the bus lot. Now, I knew the young woman behind me had been in a very serious car accident the year before with her sister. The car had flipped and rolled a few times. They were both lucky to be alive, much less walk from the accident. And knowing that she had been in this crash, I'm in my car thinking, I hope this doesn't freak her out too much because this weather is awful and it's kind of freaking me out a bit. It took us about 20 minutes longer to get to where we were going than normal. So we arrived at the parking lot. She got out of her car. She went into mine, and I turned on her seat warmer because I'm a very nice person. And then we started on our pilgrimage to the meeting. I pulled out of the parking lot, and she says to me, I just had the best experience of driving with the snow coming down and the moonlight making it seem as if all the other drivers were in slow motion. And I'm following someone I love, someone who gives my life value, meaning me. And I started looking at all the cars around me and thinking to myself, I don't know that person, but they could be one more person to love. They could be one more person to love. So I smiled at each car and sent love their way. And I looked at her and I thought, who the hell are you? But holy cow, she meant it. It wasn't fake. And how, I thought, how transcendent to have that kind of open-heartedness, like you have this space inside you that your heart can take on love over and over again, and it will never get full, it will never run out of room, it will never need or want to reject another. It was a beautiful image. I almost said it out loud, who are you? And later that night, after I dropped her off, I drove for a couple of miles thinking about my first thought of her, who the hell are you? And then I turned it on myself. Maybe, just maybe, that should be my practice every time I get into the car. That I think about every passerby. Maybe that person is one more person to love. Friends, I think that can become our practice. Not just while driving, not just on beautiful nights, but all the time. Let us remind ourselves the world is full of people ready to be loved, ready to have a loving benefit of the doubt story offered to them, a story that captures our compassion and in turn offers them our love. A story that doesn't present others as needing to be assessed as worthy of our compassion or not, but instead as one more person we get to love. May that be our collective calling, our collective challenge. May it be so. I love you. Amen. Reverend Karen Anderson.